I'm Dan.
And I'm Jordan. We're really excited about this series because we're going to look at some basics when following Jesus.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean there has to be a formula to follow Jesus, but we want to know where it starts, what it means, and what it looks like to be in a relationship with Jesus.
And we're going to start at the very beginning. The big idea for today is following Jesus starts with hearing the good news.
Awesome. I am so excited for today's God story. Let's watch this.
Welcome to Deep Thoughts That Nobody Cares About. Today's question is a sandwich, when it's open-faced, really a sandwich? Thoughts? Hey everyone, my name is Aaron and it is great to be with you. So a few years ago, I met my sister's boyfriend for the first time. And in the conversation, you always go to that, well, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I work for the church. I absolutely love it. And he started to then go on this tirade, this rant of why he hates the church. And I let him go for about 10 minutes and then I simply said to him, I said, all those things, the reasons you hate the church are the reasons why I want to work with the church. Because all the things you mentioned are all about systems and institution and religion. But here's the answer, it's Jesus. And then I got to share that with him for the first time. He'd never heard this different side of the story, that we follow Jesus, not a church. I wanted to share that story of when I met Tim because it reminds me of today's big idea, that following Jesus starts with hearing the good news. And today we're going to be starting a new series on Acts. So today's story we're going to be looking at a Roman officer named Cornelius. And it's all about how Peter came and shared the good news of Jesus with not just Cornelius, but the rest of his friends and family as well. So here's the down low on Cornelius. Now he was a good man who loved God. He prayed all the time, he was generous to the poor, he was a very kind and caring person. But here's the thing, he was not Jewish, he was a Gentile. Now why was that a big deal? Well, a lot of the early church, they were Jews who became Christians. And then Gentiles and Jews didn't really hang out very often. One afternoon while Cornelius was praying, he had a vision from God. It was an angel, and the angel said, go find Peter. So he went out, sent some men, and they brought Peter back to him. So let's check in on Peter. Now, before the men that Cornelius sent to get him got there, Peter was actually on the roof praying, and he also had a vision. So here's Peter's vision. The sky opened up, and a sheet came down, and there was all kinds of animals on it. And God said to Peter, I want you to eat all of these animals. So why is that weird that God kind of invites Peter to this buffet? Well, Jews had this rule that they weren't allowed to eat certain types of animals. And in this case, there were animals on that sheet that God had said, I don't want you to eat. So in this case, God has set a law and then said, break the law. So God comes back to him and just explains to him, he said, Peter, all those animals that I said were unclean, I've now made clean and it's okay to eat them. So after God said this, the sheet went back up and Peter came out of his prayer. He was very confused. What could this all mean? So while Peter is chilling on the roof, very confused and trying to figure out this vision, that's when Cornelius's men show up. Now the Holy Spirit had kind of told Peter that they were coming. So Peter goes down and greets them and says, listen, I'm ready to go with you. So Peter and the men went back to Cornelius to meet him. And Cornelius had all his friends and family there to kind of greet Peter and say, welcome into my household. So you remember the fact that Cornelius was a Gentile and Peter was a Jew? Well, there was actually a Jewish law that prevented Peter from going into Cornelius's house. So he started to have that conversation and said, listen, there's a Jewish law that prevents me from actually coming into your house. But, Peter said, God has shown me that I'm not to think of anybody as impure or unclean. So Peter went into Cornelius's house and they chatted about their visions that they had. And Cornelius then said, listen, we're all here. Why don't you tell us what you came to say? So Peter then got to share the good news of Jesus with Cornelius and all his friends. Now, that doesn't always happen, where someone comes up to us and says, hey, I'd like you to just tell me about Jesus. But in this situation, that's exactly what happened. And isn't that cool? You have the unique story where God has set this up, where you can just share the good news. So let's read what happens. Then Peter replied, I see very clearly that God shows no favoritism. In every nation, he accepts those who fear him and do what is right. This is the message of good news for the people of Israel, that there is peace with God through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. So Peter here is having that aha moment. He's finally figured it out that Jesus invites everyone from every nation to come follow him. How awesome is that? Let's continue reading what he says. And you know that God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power. Then Jesus went around doing good and healing all those who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. And we apostles are witnesses of all he did through Judea and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a cross. But God raised him to life on the third day. Then God allowed him to appear, not to the general public, but to whom God had chosen in advance to be his witness. We were those who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. And he ordered us to preach everywhere and to testify that Jesus is the one appointed by God to be judge of all, the living and the dead. He is the one all the prophets testified about, saying that everyone who believes in him will have their sins forgiven through his name. So once they've heard the story of Jesus, the good news, they believed and they received the Holy Spirit and they wanted to join that family. And what's cool here is God is saying, listen, I'm for everyone. Every nation is open to hearing this good news of Jesus. And how cool is that you and I are invited to do that, to share the good news. See, when you start to follow Jesus, that's where it all starts, with hearing the good news. That's today's big idea, and it's actually the big idea for the rest of our lives. It's been great hanging out with you. See you next week.
Cornelius already knew about God, but when he heard about Jesus, it changed his life forever.
Yeah, and we heard about how the Holy Spirit came down upon Cornelius and his family, and their eyes were opened to the love of Jesus for the first time. They immediately believed.
And it all started with hearing about Jesus. But that can look different for each of us. Let's watch this video, and then we'll chat about it later.
I was trying to have relationships with people, and I couldn't figure out why life wasn't working out for me. Before, I used to wake up, honestly, and feel like, what is the point? Well, my name is Fran, and I'm a creative arts therapist. I work in a children's mental health agency. I definitely practiced my faith growing up. I went to Islamic school, and it was a big part of my life. And then when I was 17, I had a dream that there was this blackness everywhere, and all I could see was black. And all of a sudden, there was this burst of light, and a voice whispered, "Truth." And so I wrote down truth on a piece of paper, and I went back to sleep. And that just set me on fire to want to know what the truth was. Tried to get more into the faith that I was brought up in. But I believed that for me, the truth is love. And I had this idea of like, oh, you just gotta love other people. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I was kind of grabbing from this philosophy and that philosophy. And I couldn't figure out why life wasn't working out for me. I couldn't understand why when I would do things to try to make myself happy, like going out and partying, why in the end it left me feeling empty. And I'm very curious and want to find out more about truth and the world that we live in and try to find a purpose for my life. And I meet this person, and I really, really respected him because we thought very similarly. He was really smart, really intelligent guy. And we would talk about ideas and what we believed the truth was. And he just started to follow Jesus. And he told me about it. And he looked at me and he, like, so seriously said, "This is the truth. Find out for yourself." And honestly, I think another piece of it is, like, in the church, I felt like I could feel God's love through other people. Like, people would say things to me, or they'd give me a hug, and they would say something that I felt like wasn't coming from them. And I'd be like, I can feel the Lord working through you. Being able to be with other believers has made me feel like I'm truly adopted as part of the family. They're the people that actually help you walk, because we're not walking alone. You know, it's hard. It's really, for me, it's been super hard because following Jesus has meant that I've lost friends and family has not wanted to be around me. I felt my whole life that there was something out there, you know, and I knew he was speaking to me in some capacity, and I was searching for him. And now I feel like I know him. It's brought me the truth, you know? It's what I've been looking for all this time.
That was so interesting. Fran's dream stirred up this curiosity within her to find truth.
Yeah, and when a friend shared with her about Jesus and told her that he is the truth, that resonated with her, and she found Jesus for herself.
Yeah, her friend did exactly what Peter did. He shared the story of Jesus with Cornelius and his family, and they immediately believed.
I love that. Let's break into our small groups now and see what that will look like in our own lives.